This episode originally aired on August 22nd, 2021. Have you ever wanted something so bad that you did whatever it took to make it happen? Hi, I'm Alicia Butler-Pierre. Back in 2001, I remember wanting to go to business school. I had to take the Graduate Management Admission Test, also known as the GMAT, to apply. As I began preparing to study for this test, I experienced a setback. I developed a cyst that required hospitalization for removal. I felt awful, but I never took my eye off the prize. I asked my sister to bring my study materials to the hospital. I mustered the energy required to continue my studies, and a couple of weeks later, I took the test and was eventually accepted into the business school of my choice. None of this would have happened were it not for my stubborn persistence. But my story pales in comparison to the one you're about to hear from perhaps the most ambitious and determined young person I've ever met. He gives new meaning to the expression, where there's a will, there's a way. And you're about to find out why and how he's using that mantra to apply operational excellence in his small business. Let's start the show.
Welcome to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues of fast-growing businesses. If you're a business owner or operator looking for practical tips and solutions to scaling your business in a sustainable manner, you're in the right place. Now here's your hostess, Alicia Butler-Pierre.
For the past several episodes, we've been focusing our conversations on operational excellence, what it is and how to achieve it. And Hassan Dantata is joining us today in Kano, a state in northern Nigeria. He's the award-winning youth advocate and founder and CEO of Raven and Macaw Limited, a software as a service company offering fully integrated digital solutions exclusively for the optical industry. And he's only 23 years old. What drives, motivates, and inspires a person his age to accomplish so much? Well, you're about to find out. Hassan, aside from the issues that I had before we started this recording, thank you so much for being here today and for being so patient with me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and thank you so much for having me. It's such a real pleasure, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Now, Kano did I correctly say that it's a state in Nigeria, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
the states in the north western parts of Nigeria.
Yes, and it's there's a city also, right, called Kano.
Yes,
by the same name.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. I'm actually looking at a map right now of Nigeria, so I'm always curious to see where exactly people are in the world.
Yeah.
We were, just to let people know how we met, we were introduced to each other by Amal Hassan, and she's also a very successful entrepreneur who's built this amazing, thriving business also in Nigeria. And when I learned about your background, Hassan, I understood right away why she thought we should meet. And, I always tell people it's very easy to see people and companies for that matter, where they are now, people that we deem to be very successful. And it's very easy to see them for who they are and what they represent, as we see them presently, without an appreciation for that behind the scenes journey that it took that person to get there, or that behind the scenes journey that it took to get a company to a certain point. Now, your entrepreneurial story, it sounds like, starts in 2012 in a hospital room. What happened?
Yeah. So I was born with a sickle cell disease, which is you inherit it from your parents and is life-threatening. And so I was born with that, and not many people are fortunate because there isn't a cure in Nigeria. So I was fortunate enough to have a bone marrow transplant in 2012 in Manchester. And that's when everything basically changed. And that was the only cure for the disease.
So you have this bone marrow transplant. I know you are, as I've read your story, you're in this hospital room by yourself, and all you have is your mind and your sheer willpower. So sounds like something happened during your recovery period. So you have surgery. How old were you at the time?
At the time, I was about 13 years old.
Okay, you were 13. And so you
Yeah.
come up with an idea for your first business, right?
Yes.
Okay, and tell us about that.
Actually, I came up with an idea just like about 3 years ago while I was still sick. And I was still in Nigeria then. It was just a little, selling sweets to my neighbors. And, I wouldn't even classify it as a business, but, that's when the whole kind of inspiration came from. And I knew from then, I wanted to become an entrepreneur. And then just later, everything, as business started to pick up, I was making money, just it was really growing. And then just, after a couple of months of doing that, I had to close, the business closed, and because of my illness. And I was admitted in the hospital with a crisis for about 3 months. And that basically brought an end to that business that I started. And then, I just gave up all hope. I said, this is not for me. I can't do this because of my health.
Mhm.
I had so many restrictions, growing up and as a child. Many things that, you'd want to do as a child, like playing football, going swimming, I could just only dream of doing that because of my health. It was really that bad. And, the hospital almost became my second home. I was almost
Mm.
always in the hospital, in crisis, crying, so I didn't really see a light at the end of the tunnel. But then, later on, when I had the transplant, it was a 50-50 because in the beginning, I even told my doctors that, I didn't want to go ahead with it because, they said, this might not go very well. It's a 50-50 chance because of my complications. But,
Mm.
in the end, my mom convinced me to, it's the only way, it's the only chance. We'll pray and everything will be fine. And thank God, everything turned out to be fine. So from that hospital bed, I started, having hope again. And I started dreaming again. I started wanting to, in fact, I couldn't even wait to get out of the hospital. And that's when I started my kind of e-commerce business from the hospital bed, where I was just selling, phones and used phones. But that really, taught me a lot, from them, because I was able to do a lot of research. I had a lot of free time. It was just a laptop on the internet. And, that I think is the foundation and the basis to, to me wanting to come into this space, which is e-commerce and marketing in general.
How long were you in the hospital? So after you have your surgery, your bone marrow transplant, how long were
Yeah.
you in the hospital after that?
Well, in straight isolation without, because what happens is when you have a transplant, your immune system is very low. So they don't even let people to come and see, even my mom had to be wearing aprons and washing her
Oh,
hands,
wow.
just like it was the COVID before the COVID.
Yeah, wow. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
exactly. So, but I was in a straight isolation for about 2 months. And then after that, I was
Whoa.
always in and out of the hospital for about a year till I fully recovered. And then I stopped. I still haven't stopped going to the hospital, but obviously the checkups are a lot longer, maybe 2 years, 3 years, just to check up and see how it's going.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you're in complete isolation, Hassan, and
Yeah.
you're able to have a laptop brought in? So that was
Yeah,
okay?
that's yeah, that's one of the things that they do because as a child, you're gonna get really bored. So they
Yes.
give so and I did, I even got tired of the books and the games, they bring in it was a PS3 at that time. So they bring in games and a lot of entertainment. There's play specialists, which are like trained nurses at the time. So they're allowed to come in with an apron, with their hand washed and everything,
Mhm.
but for only a limited amount of time, even that. So yeah, so I kind of didn't get as bored as I should have been, but because I had the laptop and all those entertainments.
So you start off at 13 selling
Yeah,
sweets to your neighbors. Eventually you have to forfeit that dream because
yeah,
of your illness. You eventually take that 50-50 chance of having this bone marrow transplant only to find yourself in isolation for 2 months. So you're on your laptop now, and How did you go from selling sweets in person to selling things digitally? How and where did this idea for e-commerce start for you?
Well, I have always been like a curious kind of person. So I think it was my curiosity.
Mm.
I think at that time, I didn't really think of it as a business. I really wanted a phone. So yeah, I really wanted a phone, and I tried to find good deals on eBay and tried to convince my mom to buy that phone for me. And then, it was through that research that I saw, it was just normal people putting things online, some of their old phones or, just old stuff. And then it just gave me idea I could do the same. And, I had old scrappy phones as well that I could sell that I don't need anymore, my old games. So then I thought let me just try it and see how it goes. And that's when it started.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, did you actually start a standalone e-commerce business, or did you set yourself up as a vendor on a website like an eBay?
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't exactly, I set myself up as a vendor,
Okay.
and then I was selling on that platform. Yeah.
Okay. And so you did that before you left the hospital.
Yeah, yeah. I even kind of got in trouble with the hospital because they said you can't just yeah, because I was using the hospital resources to print to print, and they're like, you can't do that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But thankfully that was towards the end. So yeah.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Exactly.
Because I'm just thinking, when you have to actually ship these products that you were selling, even if it was through eBay, how were you able to do that from a hospital room?
Yeah, I didn't do that, to be honest.
Okay.
That was when my mom,
Oh,
kind of
your mom
helped out.
helped. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you are, if nothing else, you are incredibly resourceful. I must say. So, okay. So,
Yeah.
in America, we have an expression here, necessity is the mother of invention. So
Invention.
yes, you start off with this, becoming a vendor on eBay. Did you eventually start your own e-commerce business, like a standalone entity?
What I did after coming out of the hospital, I met a few of my mom's friends, who were all based in Manchester. One had a salon which was a business that she closed and wasn't functioning, but she still had all the equipment, and she was trying to get rid of them. So I told her, let me put it on eBay for you, and you just cut me a deal, and when it sells, and then I cleared like almost half of the garage, full of hairdressing equipment.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's kind of, so then I just had an idea, that I can do this for other businesses too, because a lot of businesses were traditional and they weren't online, so they were still dependent on the traditional means, to sell their products. So I approached another DIY shop, and then a bike shop, all putting things for them online. So it wasn't my products I was selling. I was selling other people's products. It was
Mm.
just, an agreement, that, I can, open a new revenue stream for you, if you like, online. And, they always, they bought into that. Not everyone did. Some people just thought, it wouldn't work. But the few people that, I was able to get to trust me with their stuff and their eBay,
Hmm.
they were able to sell a lot of items.
So it sounds like you and your mom stayed in Manchester for quite some time. Is that correct? Once
Yeah,
you leave the hospital, do you stay in Manchester for a little while, or at what point do you go back to Nigeria?
yeah, because I had a few complications after the transplant, even though it wasn't anything major. So it needed me seeing the doctors almost regularly, like a monthly basis, 2 monthly basis, different, specialties. So, and already by then, I started school in Manchester. So we kind of just settled in, and I was there for about 8 years.
I know. It was just starting to get good, right? Well, there's more where that came from. To listen to the full interview, be sure to click the link in the description box below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell so that you'll know when our next episode drops. Until then, keep operating smoothly.
Join us next week for another episode of Business Infrastructure with Alicia Butler-Pierre.